I have tried hundreds of whiskies this year, and now I'm going to announce my whiskey of the year for 2024. This year's a little bit surprising because when I was making this list, trying to pick out the whiskies that I enjoyed the most this year, over half of the list ended up being whiskies not from Scotland, that weren't Scotches, to the point that I've actually separated my Whiskey of the Year video into a World Whiskey of the Year and this one. And the big difference between the two is that video availability can be an issue with some of those countries that have much smaller distilleries and distribution, but in this video, it's going to tick all of those. Good value, they should be available in most countries, and it's got to be very tasty to end up on this list. But before I jump into my number one Whiskey of the Year, I've got some runners up, some special mentions, ones that if you can't get my Whiskey of the Year, that I also think are going to be fantastic whiskies. So the first whiskey on this list is an absolute banger. People are going absolutely nuts over this whiskey. In fact, thousands and thousands of whiskey geeks and enthusiasts voted this as their number one best value whiskey of 2024 in the online Scotch Whisky Awards, which I was involved in. This whiskey is from Campbelltown, so straight away your mind might go to, say, Springbank, but Springbank can be hard to find. I have had multiple bottles of this. It's from the Glengyle distillery, and you've probably already guessed it, the Kilkerran 12, 46% unchill filtered, natural color, and I can see why so many people are going nuts over the Kilkerran 12. So let's jump into the tasting notes. You get that classic light and floral flavors that you get in a lot of ex-bourbon cask whiskies, but it's also got this really nice saltiness to it. On the palate, you get a lemon, it's zesty, some biscuity, malty notes. And what I do like as well is it also has a little bit of that classic Campbelltown funk. I wouldn't say as much as a Springbank. If you don't know what funkiness means, check out my flavor tree where you can like figure out what the flavors actually are. It's got this kind of sort of savory notes, oily industrial thing. It's not super sweet. Probably not one I'd give to beginners, but I think if you're along your whiskey journey and you've now been through kind of a lot of the classic whiskies, I think this should be next on your list. But let's jump into the next one. I think this might surprise some people. I think sometimes us whiskey YouTubers can be accused of like being in a bubble and just talking about the same whiskies. That can be true, but also kind of untrue, because I think a lot of the whiskies I talk about on my channel, a lot of other whiskey YouTubers don't like. So I think you should really like consume multiple pieces of content. But also, I think if you want whiskies that are quite different to kind of what other people are talking about, go watch my World Whiskey of the Year. There are definitely whiskies in that I'm pretty sure you wouldn't have had. But in this video, I think Roy from Aquavitae is right when he talks about it's not about us being in a bubble. There are certain whiskies that are actually just consensus. A lot of people from around the world all love them. And I think that's definitely true for the Kilkerran 12 I just talked about and for this next one. For me personally, I think the Balvenie 12 is a fantastic whiskey that kind of blends ex-bourbon casks with ex-sherry casks. But always my critique with Balvenie 12, look, I love to introduce it to beginners, but it can sometimes be quite expensive, especially here in New Zealand. And the ABV just seems a little bit too low for me. So this one here, I think is kind of the answer. It is the Glengarry 12. This is a great whiskey and I think quite an underrated whiskey. It's 48%, it's unchill filtered, it's 12 years old. I think when people think of like kind of a sherry cask sort of whiskies, you know, they'll be thinking of, say, Bunnahabhain 12, they'll be thinking of the Tamdhu 12, the Aberlour, Abanar and that sort of stuff. But this isn't a sherry bomb. What I really like about it is it's just a really well-balanced whiskey. Neither casks over-dominate the spirit, right? You can still get the spirit and distillery style out of this whiskey. And sometimes when we drink whiskey, we actually don't want balanced whiskey, like Lefroy 10 cask strength, for example. You don't buy that for a balanced whiskey. You want a flavor smoke bomb, peat bomb, and sometimes that's just what I'm in the mood for. So let's jump into the tasting notes. I'm getting a lot of that vanilla, the biscuity notes, then you're getting some of that floral and fruity notes, heather, and then there's definitely the sherry casks. That's the dried fruits and the spice flavors coming through. Sometimes you just want a classic good Scotch that kind of plays all the elements really well. Ex-bourbon casks, you can still taste the distillery spirit and your sherry casks. But I also think this next whiskey is fantastic. Out of all the distilleries in the world, this is the distillery I've bought the most bottles from. And this one, I think of their range, is my favorite out of all of them. And I've had the 21-year-old and I like this better. And they often call the distillery where this one is from the Springbank of Speyside. So you might have already guessed what it is, and it's going to be the Ben Romick Distillery. So this is the cask strength. It comes out in batches, so the ABV will be different batch to batch, just like most cask strength releases, your Aberlour Abernars, your Maker's Mark cask strengths and that sort of thing. They also mainly use first fill casks. Pretty cool. First fill. Get it? Honestly, I feel bad like talking about this whiskey because I really don't want it to become like a Springbank and people buying it a lot, and it is getting harder to, I think people are catching on about how good the Ben Romick flavor profile is. This is not your kind of light and fruity and kind of easy drinker. Ben Romick has such a thick and complex and heavy character. To the tasting notes, it's got that kind of, there's the red berries. There's also like this darkened kind of note, not quite a nuttiness, but like a dark chocolate. So on that palate, there's like a heavy sort of savoriness. There's that slightly industrial flavors. So let's jump to the next one, which I think is incredible. And I don't think enough people talk about this whiskey. It's really good. So this next whiskey on this list, I feel like is one a few years ago that a lot of people going on about. But I do think people sometimes forget about this whiskey. But actually, in terms of those kind of spirit-forward ex-bourbon cask whiskies, fruity, floral, I think this is one of my favorite whiskies in that category, along with the Glencairn 10, the Arran 10. I just think it's an absolutely fantastic whiskey that I love to give whiskey enthusiasts who want something complex that lets the spirit speak. It's kind of a no-fuss Highland whiskey, but also it's one that has worked well with whiskey beginners as well. And there's not many whiskies that can do that I can give to both people. So this is the sort of whiskey I would take to a whiskey tasting if I know there's going to be an audience of people at different stages on their whiskey journey. It just seems to be a crowd pleaser. What is it going to be? It is going to be the Deanston 12. This one is 46.3% unchill filtered. One of the best things about the Deanston as well though is just that value. Like it's always been a good price and it's always been available. I almost feel like I don't talk about it because I'm like, oh yeah, of course it's good. Of course it's always on the shelf. I always have a Deanston, which kind of means that I think people who are newer to my channel might not even really know about it. You definitely get those light white fruits. It also has this kind of like vanilla note to it, like a hay note. It's not like super farmy, it's just a little bit. But let's jump to my actual whiskey of the year. I think some of you will be shocked by this pick, some of you will be surprised, but are quite different to this one. And it'll be interesting because I think some of you will prefer this and some of you will prefer the next one. So for any whiskey to be my whiskey of the year, it needs to be great value, available, and very, very tasty. There are not many whiskies that can get onto this list. Last year, for those who want to know, and if you want to know the other picks I had last year, go watch my 2023 Whiskey of the Year video. I think all those picks are still going to be great. So last year was the Kilchoman St. and a lot of you went out and got this and absolutely love it. It was good value, had good specs, it's smoky, but also had this kind of sherry cask influence. This is not on purpose, but this next whiskey, as I was saying, is quite different to the Deanston, but maybe in some ways kind of similar to the St. It's a smoky whiskey, and probably the most controversial thing, and I think some of you might think this is a controversial pick, is that it's also been finished in wine casks. And there's some kind of like Scotch purists out there who think really it should only be ex-bourbon casks. No wine casks in my whiskey. Nah. When I give them this, they're like, oh, whoa, okay. And a lot of people prefer this to the regular release. And I'm sure a lot of you have guessed which whiskey it is already, so I won't keep you waiting any longer. It is the Lechaig Sinclair series. So this one, it's aged in ex-bourbon casks and then finished in Rioja or Rioja casks, which is a red wine from Spain. This is a fantastic whiskey. I actually prefer it over the Lechaig 10, which is a favorite amongst whiskey enthusiasts. What's great is that it's smoky, but this is not from Islay. So a lot of my videos where I've talked about kind of my top Islay whiskies or my top smoky whiskies, I always have this asterisk where I'm like, look, you've got all these Isleys, your classics and stuff, but have you tried the Lechaig? 46.3%, unchill filtered, natural color. almost like quite meaty, like a barbecue like crisps. And it just has that blend of kind of smoke and spice and meat that you can see the Rioja cast coming through. But I just want to say thanks to all of you, the First Fill fam, people who watch my channel. And it's really cool to see how far my channel has gone this year and to see all of you get so involved, to explore whiskey, to share whiskey. And you guys are always teaching me so much. So tell me, which whiskey was your favorite this year? I'll be really interested. Leave a comment down below. But above all, share and enjoy.